Joined here by Stephen Caldwell after the draw for European World Cup qualifying ahead of the 2026 World Cup here in Canada, the United States and Mexico. There are 12 groups. Some of them have 4 teams, some have 5. There are still some mysteries with the 8 teams involved in the Nations League in an either-or scenario, depending what happens in those Nations League games. But when you look at the 12 groups and the fact that the 12 group winners get through and the runners-up then go to playoffs, are there really any teams that could have trouble? Big teams.
I mean, you don't know, do you? You don't know. And it's such a complicated setup. It's really hard to predict, Luke. We still don't really know the setup of the groups because of the 8 Group A Nations League qualifiers in the quarter-final. So there's still a lot to be decided. But I do think that there's some interesting scenarios. There's some scenarios where maybe some of the big guns are in a situation where they've got a more difficult group. There's some difficult pot 3 teams, and there's certainly some challenging pot 2 teams out there where you think one of the big guns, like in Italy, might be in a little bit of trouble. They've struggled in the previous 2 World Cups to get to the finals. So you look at them, you think they're a young team, they're up and coming. I kind of like what they're doing, actually. They've got some interesting players, but they don't have that experience. I think Croatia are at the other end of that spectrum, where they're getting a little bit older and they're a little bit vulnerable. Do they have the quality to come through, or are they going to have some challenges? And then I look at some of the contenders in maybe a Sweden and a Norway, teams like that who have potential. They have players, they're getting better, they're a little bit younger, and they're trying to build on some success that's been missing when it comes to World Cups in the last 3, 4, 5 editions.
Let's just get into Italy then, because if they win their Nations League game against Germany, they would be in Group A, Slovakia, Northern Ireland and Luxembourg. Surely at that point, there isn't any kind of issue for Italy getting through. If they lose to Germany, then they're in the 5-team group with Norway, who are your favourites to win it all, obviously, now that you think they're going to become world beaters, Israel, Estonia and Moldova. So is there really any danger?
I think there is danger. I think Norway are a decent side. They'll fancy their chances. Every away game is going to be difficult. Israel have done well in recent years as well. And the Nations League gave an opportunity for some of these smaller nations to develop and to show their potential and to achieve. So I think it's given them some real confidence to go into World Cup qualifying and maybe make a splash. And that being said, when you've got teams like Italy and teams that have been there and done it consistently, then usually there is that air of confidence when it comes to this stage. But you can't rule out some of the up-and-comers. I think when you've got an outstanding player or 2 within your group, like I said, Sweden, Gyökeres and Isak Kulusevski, you've got Norway, you've got Odegaard, you've got Haaland, you cannot rule them out. They're more than capable of going out in any given game, especially at home, and causing an upset.
Various different factors taken into account when these groups were made, including some teams that couldn't play too many home games in winter months. There were lots of different permutations that went into this draw, and the pots that there were, and the Nations League qualifications. But when it comes out with the expanded World Cup, there are now 16 European teams, 3 more European teams than last time. I just look at some of these groups. And maybe it's the English bias in terms of you expect them to be at the World Cup and expect them to be qualifying. But you look at some of these bigger nations, the nations that have had success on the world stage, got to the later stages of tournaments at the Euros, the World Cups, and it almost seems like a formality for a lot of these groups.
Yeah, and you could be right. Look, history tells us that England's and Germany's, Spain's, they breeze through qualification. They barely lose a game. They barely give away points. So history tells us that they are going to be strong and they find their A game when it matters most, and this is the stage when it does. So, but there's always an upset, isn't there? We look back and we see Italy not being there in Russia in 2018, not being at Qatar in 2022, and we were so shocked, and it certainly took a bit away from the World Cup, but they have to be on their game, these guys, these big nations. And some of them, as we mentioned, Denmark being a pot 1 team, I think are vulnerable. Croatia are aging. We talked about that. Portugal, they can be a little bit hit and miss. So you have to go into it with a full confidence that with the set of players that you have, and home games are vital. I keep reiterating that. If you win your home games, you give yourself a great chance of being in the playoffs or potentially nicking that first spot.
And you've talked a lot about a Norway or Sweden maybe maybe having the opportunity to get there. You look at a group like Group H, Austria, Romania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Cyprus, San Marino. We've talked a lot about Austria of late. And look at the path for a team like them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a path that they can go and achieve, but they've got to step up. They have to show that they're capable of delivering at this level at the important part, which is the qualification. So we'll see what they're made of. But we also saw a Romania side in the Euros who played extremely well and who showed some real potential of development as well. So they'll fancy their chances. They'll look at it and say, it's not a Germany, it's not an England, it's not a Spain. We can go out there and we can potentially get a result against Austria. So there's these scenarios where I think when you're in your camp and you know what you have at your disposal, you feel like there's a little pathway there that if you play at your full potential, you can maybe get there.
I don't know if you felt the same, but on the TSN Soccer group chat this morning, I felt there were contrasting emotions from yourself and from Kevin Kilban. Ireland in there with Hungary, Armenia and Denmark, Portugal, and I think he's already sort of, expecting a tough time with this, if not given up altogether. Whereas you with Scotland, Denmark or Portugal, Greece and Belarus are thinking they could actually win the World Cup.
Win the World Cup, I think, is taking it a little bit far, but I do think we can get there because of that progression, because of the development. I think Kevin's a little bit negative. We understand why. It's not been a great time for Ireland. And in Scotland, on the other hand...
Kevin's a bit negative would suffice. You don't need to expand.
Yeah, but I think that the Nations Leagues gave Scotland a platform to improve and to show that they're capable. They've been in Group A, so they've been playing against some high-level sides. They've had some great results. They've done extremely well in that group to get in a playoff position, to stay in Group A. So it's really great for Scotland. Ireland, on the other hand, have not. They've not been performing. So I can see why Kevin's a little bit more negative. And it's that pot 3. Now, they're both in pot 3. But when Scotland look at their pot 2 adversary in Greece, they'll think, and they're playing them in the playoffs, incidentally, in the Nations League to stay in Group A, they'll think that they can probably beat Greece. Whereas Hungary and Ireland, you see a bit of a mismatch there with Hungary's recent success. So... we'll have to see. There's a lot of scenarios out there that are still, but our Kevin was a little bit negative, wasn't he? Let's be honest.
Just finally, of course, it's an expanded World Cup with 48 teams. We talked about the 3 additional teams coming from Europe to 16. We know there are going to be more CONCACAF representatives. Do you think the weighting is right in terms of having those 16 European teams in a 48-team World Cup?
Oh, it's a great question. To answer it honestly, I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right when you see the quality and the depth of quality in the European qualification. I do think they should have got more places, but I understand that this is called the FIFA World Cup.
Yeah.
It's for everybody. It's not just for the best teams.
It's not let's find a way to get Scotland in.
Well,
keep adding
that's
places
what I was hoping. We'd maybe get 20 places and Scotland would make it. But no, I mean 3 extra places when the number of teams that are in Europe, what is it, we're 50-something teams. I don't think that it's right that it's only 3 extra places when you see some of the extra places that are given around the world. South America, CONMEBOL as an example, get 2 extra places, 2 confirmed extra places, but there's only 10 teams in South America, and there's only been winners of this World Cup from Europe and from South America. So for me, the balance is a little bit off. I'd like to see maybe a couple of more places for European teams, and it would give Steve Clarke's starting army a better chance.
OK, well, qualifying will start in Europe for the World Cup in March.